Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Talk to the Fedora, where we chat about hard-hitting, honest entrepreneur wisdom that you can use to grow your small business. I'm your host, Jarrod Goldsmith from eSAX Virtual Events, and today we're very pleased to be welcoming Stephen Anderson. Stephen serves to lead. He determines what's needed and works to implement it with an objective that ultimately benefits an organization, its employees, customers, and the communities in which they operate. His passion is to build businesses with a clear strategic advantage in products and services that are ahead of the curve and new to the industry. The seed of this realization grew when Stephen was a journalist covering technology for the New York Times. As a managing partner with the Marquis Advisory Group, he focuses on enabling the management of foreign-based companies to enter the US market. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Looking forward to having this conversation.
Thank you, Stephen. So let's back up a little bit. We just covered very briefly a little bit about you, but would you like to explain a little bit about what's the Marquee Group? What are you all about?
Well, primarily we're about using the latest information and curves that are going on in every sector, but we focus on just 4 sectors. Education, agriculture, environment, and the final one is really the entrepreneur. Now, it's not final in our list, but if you look at those 4, they are all integrated. You cannot have the advance in agriculture, for instance, without having entrepreneurs in agriculture, whether it's technology or farming. Mm-hmm. So that is our focus, because we think those 4 things are probably the most important for the economy of the world. And therefore, it's very easy for us to feel a dedicated assessment and determining our time and how we spend our time.
You know, that's a very honest and earnest way to consider what you do. I mean, part of my responsibilities way back when I was working for the Department of Foreign Affairs here in the Canadian government years ago, part of my portfolio was agriculture. It's absolutely huge, as it is in every single country in the world.
Yeah, and it's getting seriously in trouble.
Yeah,
for multiple reasons. But you know, on the other hand, if you're going to be in our business, which is really trying to provide with insight on how to solve problems, which are sometimes you're blinded to. So that's one of the reasons why we use this terminology of having 3D viewpoint of things, so that our experiences that so frequently people who are operating businesses are very focused just on the things that they know most, but it doesn't give them access to maybe what are the barriers for their success. And so we try to encourage 3D thinking and viewing as part of our assessment.
I mean, because most people may or may not realize that business in any industry is not linear.
No, exactly. That's very clear. And so what our process for doing that, just if it might be, and I'll do this briefly, is that we sit down with the person who is leading the organization and talk to them for free about how we do it and how are they looking at their own business. And then the next session is we come back to them and say, here's what we're observing. What do you think? And develop some ideas about how to resolve it. That is also we do, just try to get them to thinking about it. And at that point, we can all decide whether it's worthwhile pursuing or not.
I think that's such a valid business model. So many of us are so focused in what we're doing. We have our blinders on. We're not looking, we're not asking other people and other trusted people like in the industry or even outside specialists, you know, how do you think we're doing? You know, can we focus on X, Y, Z? And so it's almost like a, what's the word they use in the government? Sober second thought.
SST. We could just do that. That would be a good headline.
SST, yeah. So, Stephen, how did you get involved and start the Marquee Group? Why did you? What was your origin story for that?
Well, it's interesting. As you said, I worked at the New York Times and then at McGraw-Hill as a journalist. And what I learned in that was to ask more questions than giving answers or making don't come to conclusions without knowing. That's basically the problem. So that was a very, very fundamental to basically the fundamentals and the origin of what I'm doing today. So in that process, I'll just do this briefly. I was writing about two high-tech companies that were competing against each other in something that was fairly new on the marketplace. And inadvertently, I wrote one sentence about a suggested strategy that would help them gain more customer. And one of the companies called me up and said, "We don't have anybody here to do that strategy. Would you leave McGraw-Hill and come and work with us?" And I thought, oh my goodness. So I'm here. My wife and I are living in Manhattan, and we're getting asked to move to southern New Jersey. And I said, well, let's see. So we did make the move, and that was the bridge to my basically being like a consultant within an organization. And I ultimately then worked for two more Fortune 500 companies with similar kinds of problems. So that was really, really the learning process.
Sure. And then you wanted to bring that expertise, that knowledge to help other organizations.
Yes, I thought, I've now have this understanding of how it works on the inside, and where to look and what kind of things to ask about, and to do it in a way that is useful. And the art of this is understanding management's resistance and vulnerability. Resistance can be done and come over by just getting to the right information that they say, aha, yes, that's right. Not convincing them, but just making them aware of it.
Because I would think that C-suite executives, they might not take too kindly to, hey, you know what? Maybe you want to reconsider the way you're running your business.
Yes, right. Well, I didn't. That's the approach that a lot of people take, and we try to provide them with the information, let them make the decision.
So prior to working with McGraw, as a journalist originally, did you have a background in business or entrepreneurship?
No, I had, this is sort of a quick anecdote again. I had, when I went to St. Lawrence University, which is in northern New York State, and it's fairly close to Ottawa. It's way up. Anyway, I went to New York City, having been an English major, and said, I would like to work in the news media. Luckily, the New York Times was interested in hiring me. And how I got into basically their process of teaching inside on how to be a journalist. And it was, for a young boy from growing up in Western New York State, it was a shocker, but a very, very engaging, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I can imagine that. But you were okay with the moving, picking up, and just traveling as needed at the time?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, at the time, moving to New York City was terrific. I was delighted to be there. It was not it was not scary to me, but I didn't realize the escalation of expectation in the city. And on all accounts. An example, this is sort of an extreme example, but here I'm very young, And the guy who covers the all of the shows that are going on in New York for the Times said, look, if you have a date and you want to get a ticket to one of the shows, I can get it for you. I said, I sort of looked at him. I said, are you kidding? No, he said, no, and so I took advantage of that. And that was so, but it just shows, those are the kinds of things that are invisible to us. You know, it's sort of like, almost like politics.
Yeah.
You know, the things that are not seen that are there, but are commonly accepted and practiced.
Right. And talking about adapting, resiliency, like when you started working to help these other organizations,
Yes.
how did you face being a relatively young
Yes. Right.
specialist, dealing with some of these people who may have been quite a lot older?
Yes, quite a lot older, and as you suggested, maybe set in their ways. And I did this intentionally. I tried to not have a high-level identity or assignment, and tried to be very, not invisible, but not presenting myself as being the next solution to your problem within the organization. So gradually, I got accepted, and that made my ability to bring new ideas to the organizations. You know, you take a Fortune 500 company that is, you know, really big, it's hard to get everybody in agreement. So you have to find that person who can help you and then try to work that around. But it was really mostly about the methodology, and had, you know, and the, I think, the benefit of the accepting of the suggestions and the ideas.
You know, this leads very well into our next question about some
Okay.
networking tips.
Yes. Okay.
It doesn't matter what industry you're in. For the most part, you will probably be working, not you, but well, everybody, rather,
Everybody.
working with other people. And how can you help them either advance through your business, their business, collaborate? But let's talk about some of your favorite networking tips, Stephen. Would you care to share some?
Yeah, it's a short list. Rather than bragging about myself when I meet somebody, I ask them a lot of questions. And then that helps them feel comfortable and more open. And then they'll start asking me, well, you know, tell me about you. And then I try to be very minimum on that. And that process, though, is opens up the door in terms of the relationship and what their needs are.
I think that's a very valuable point, because a lot of the times people are nervous, they're shy, they're intimidated, they don't like networking, they're afraid of the sales pitches.
Yes,
I'm generalizing here. And what do people know about? They know about themselves.
Yes.
And a lot of the times they like talking about, I'm so great and I've done this, here's my resume, and I'm blah, blah, blah. 20 minutes later, you barely got a word in.
Right. And you don't really know much more about them either.
Yeah, but asking questions is such a key part of the networking. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's very, very important.
Yeah, it is important. And having a genuine interest in the answers, because usually the answer leads to another question.
Yeah.
And that enhances their feeling of comfort and also their willingness to share with you and trust you. Now, that doesn't happen every time, but that is standard for me. Also built on my journalism background.
Yeah, I mean, it's that curiosity as well, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. And you know, I must say this, that my curiosity is one of the things that has been one of the strongholds of my life. I mean, today, I love finding out things, doing research on things, some things that are not really important, but I'm curious about. So a recent research project is finding out how clouds are formed. I mean, that's not relevant to my work or my day, but it's a curiosity.
Yeah. And I mean, have you always had that interest in the technology? And especially in the last 20 years, it's just exploded, the technology.
Well, technology has been sort of, I mean, on a secondary part, I've always been interested in motorcycles and cars and things like that. So those were early technologies in my world. And that it crosses over. So you get kind of a feeling of what is going on and knowing what's going on. But the technology thing really started with that first request to work with that company on its strategy. That gave me insight into how the strategy companies work, development and marketing, things like that.
I mean, when in your case, Stephen, when you're working with other organizations, people, Fortune 500 companies, the concept of collaboration, rather than getting up and spouting, which is not your style, about how people should change and adapt, how do you collaborate with others?
Again, it starts with, first of all, insisting that I am not the solution, but we'll be collaborating on the solution with you. And we'll also collaborate with you all the way to make sure that it works. So I'm not just coming in and saying, here's what you need to do. You do this and everything will be fine and I'll see you tomorrow, So I'm committing to helping from the start, finding what the problem are, agreeing what the problems are, and then executing the problem. So that to me is the ultimate of collaboration. It's sort of like a marriage that is going to have to sustain itself to be successful.
Right. And that inward thinking, it just reminds me of like a psychologist, but in your case, you're like a high-level business psychologist helping them realize the issues rather than telling them what they need to do. They realize it themselves.
Yes. Yeah. I want them to realize it themselves. Otherwise, I can say there's many, many examples, and you probably have seen a lot of them, where they've adopted something that they have been either read about or they've been advised about, and they try to do it and it fails and they say, no, now what am I going to do? Or they've already spent a lot of money and it hasn't worked. And I think that is the end game. That's not good,
Right. I mean, you've had the chance to work in many organizations, large, I'm sure small as well.
Yes.
Would you have any thoughts about branding? A lot of the listeners of our podcast are small business, but using lessons from the bigger players can probably be very advantageous.
Well, branding has changed dramatically. I mean, effective branding has changed dramatically in the last, I would say, less than 5 years. Whereas a single brand by larger corporations that could just identify it and use it. I mean, I think about the gasoline companies, Exxon, and look at Amazon. I mean, what Amazon is an example is that they did it on multiple levels. There was everything, and they picked a word that who would ever pick that for this business? But it was a single word, and everybody uses it. It's like Zoom. I mean, people talk about, use it as a adjective or so. I guess my suggestion is that today you cannot depend on a single delivery or a single way of getting your ID out. You have to use it in multiple levels, and that includes your customers.
And the multiple levels, are you talking about the channels, like the social media, print?
Yeah, I mean, almost everything that touches the outside world for you and internally. And sometimes that is, sometimes it's not, I wouldn't say it's overlooked, but you can't avoid, you can't not include it, even if you do it softly, but just include it as part of your identity in different ways. And
how would one go ahead and have it as part of their identity, like the concept of branding?
Yes, and the concept of branding. So for instance, uh, people small businesses have a tendency to think we don't have the budget to do a huge marketing program.
Yeah, and they're looking for ways to squash it because they think it's going to be expensive.
Too expensive, too expensive. And I argue that you don't have to do a big marketing program to be your identity recognized. You can do it in indirect ways or direct ways that are more sustainable. And an example of that is creating newsletters, using the media that is as accustomed to customers and reaches them. If you are providing your customers with information that's useful for them and is not related to your product, they start valuing you and even then start talking about you. So it's about building your reputation with the immediate marketplace that you have and any place else that you can reach out. You don't have to be bragging. Again, it's almost like collaboration already. It is getting them to support you.
Right.
And they're supporting value,
Yeah, the supporting angle may or may not necessarily take on purchasing a product or service, but how would you say somebody might be able to assist a small business if they're not interested in the products or services?
Well, I think that almost almost anything that you do, say for instance, you're a neighborhood grocer, and that's a very important product or service. But the neighborhood grocer also has somebody who is just starting a little business that is providing repairs for phones.
Yes.
Mobile phones. Totally different from them. I think that the person who is running the grocery store can support the phone person, and the phone person can support the grocery store by collaborating and saying that having some sign in the grocery store of this new service and saying, we really have we benefited from that. The guy at the phone service could say, even have some exhibit or having some of the products that they serve at the store, and somebody say, well, why do you have that? He said, well, I use it, I buy it, and they're the best stuff in the town, or something like that,
I love that. Like the concept of B2B businesses working together. It doesn't matter if you're large or small.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not invisible, I mean, it can be almost anything that you're doing. Plumbers or dishwashers. I don't, it seems to be easy to think of it in a, again, 3-dimension way.
Right. Actually, I remember, it reminds me of years ago, I think it was IBM reached out to me to be like a community partner. They after some paperwork, obviously, they sent me a Surface Pro, like the top level Surface Pro, that for me to test out and use and write blogs about. I said, hey, this sounds great, but I don't use laptops. Why don't or tablets rather? Why don't I lend it to other entrepreneurs and let them test it out and write their own blog? They said, great idea. And we had about 10, 15 different blogs that, again, I was able to put on my channels. They cross-promoted it, but I had to give the product back, obviously, at the end.
Exactly.
But great partnership from this large organization, just a one-person shop like me. So you have nothing to lose by asking.
No. But that's a perfect example of how to reach out, and it benefits everyone, both the big guys and these people who are doing the blogs and you. So I think it's collaboration.
Yeah, excellent. Love hearing that. And the collaboration angle sometimes may or may not involve money. Like this is how.
In fact, yeah, it may not initially involve money, but ultimately it has feedback that can benefit. It can be a resource for you. But I don't start out with that as being my end goal. I think if I can do something worthwhile, whatever the outcome is, it's beneficial.
Yeah. And the concept of money,
Yeah.
at least for a small business, we're not
Yep.
talking like the C-suite, Fortune 500 who have their board of directors, one person shop, maybe their significant others helping them business. How can they leverage the concept of cash flow? Like, would you have any tips for small business?
Yes. And cash flow particularly is one of the things that they seem to focus a little bit too much on. And it seemed to take away, and I know that this is important to them for their own income, but the focus that they have to really move it to is to the customer. Or it's what is the sensitivity to the customer in terms of what are you doing to their cash flow? Are you contributing to it, or are you improving it and making them aware of that? And that raises the value of you to them. So instead of focusing on, oh my God, my cash flow is going down 30% now, and I think it's because of COVID. Well, that's probably not necessarily the reason. It's easy to point a finger at that, but that's not it. So again, you go back to give satisfaction and usefulness to the person who is your source of cash and flow. And it sounds like a soft answer, but I think it works. And I think that that's what we would practice.
Right. So, Stephen, if an organization is realizing that there's an issue with their cash flow, money is a little short from the last 3 months compared to now, could be these external forces, but you're suggesting that they reevaluate how they get the word across about what they offer?
How they, well, I think that's part of it. But what you really need to do is to go back to your customer base and say, what is it that you need that we could provide or that we can help you with? Either putting you in the hands of somebody else or whatever else. And then start exploring the problem. In other words, if you're having cash flow, there's a reason for it. And it's probably because the customer is also having cash flow problems. And what are they doing? It's not working right for them. So it's being sensitive about their problem, not your problem, right. And working with them to solve it.
And this leads back to the point of networking you said about asking appropriate questions.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I mean, in some ways, there's very little difference. It's almost the same methodology, but it has to, you just have to have it internal.
Right. And the methodology leads us to talking about the concept of processes. Like a lot of people, I would say, at least when they're starting out, they may not have a background in entrepreneurship. I'm going to do it this way, It seems to be haphazard. They're a little disorganized. Would you care to share some tips on how people can organize their processes?
Yes. First of all, write them down.
That's a good one. It's a good start.
And then, and the other thing, I mean, when you do say, you start thinking about what are the steps of executing on something, and try it out, and be flexible to be able to say, this didn't work. I've got to give that up, and what do I do to substitute? What would work? And if you don't have the answer, ask somebody else, and try to. And don't be stuck on the execution until it starts working. In other words, be flexible throughout the whole process. That's really important. But I do feel, though, having a roadmap, quote, that you need to have a way of guiding yourself and keeping you on track, but being able to identify what is working, what's not working.
That's so important once organizations scale up and they start having staff.
Yeah.
They have
even if you're doing it all by yourself.
Yeah.
You think, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I can remember. And then something else interferes. You get a cold, or you have a car accident, or you get distracted. And it just keeps you back on track, keeping you on the path. It also allows you to look back and say, okay, I made all these changes, and now I'm beginning to see what really works. And now I can emphasize those things that really worked well by putting more effort into those, because you could rank them by their impact.
Right, right. And I could talk about a personal example I launched my music business in 2011. Okay, book gigs, everything's fine. COVID hit, musicians took a hit. And it was a long time before I had to write another contract. I ended up signing something for somebody doing a wedding later this year. And I sent them the contract, the information, but I forgot to add the music union's pension percentage to it. So I thought, okay, do I take the hit because I didn't include it in the original quote? But I know the woman, I've known her for years. And because I didn't have these processes written down, I thought I would never forget. I've been writing them, doing them for 10 years. And all of a sudden I didn't write a contract in a year and a half and I forgot something.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No, that's a perfect example. I mean, that happens. And even if you're, well, anyway, I don't think we have to repeat that, but I think that it's easy to do. And particularly when you're growing a business and things are changing, and heaven only knows, we all are seeing rapid changing on every spectrum of our work. Technology, customer needs, it just is, that's the most difficult thing to me, is keeping up what the needs are. And because it's competitive advantages, and how you manage to indoctrinate and keep that up, your system up to speed with it. Doesn't mean that you have to operate like a Fortune 500.
Right.
But you have to be as good as your competition.
That's really important. And how has the idea of COVID thrown a wrench into this? Like, how have the organizations adapted their own business models related to COVID? Would you care to share some thoughts on that?
Yeah. When COVID hit, we made a sort of a checklist of companies saying, recognizing this is going to be a slow period in business. It's going to hit everybody. So what can you do to change your business when you're not so distracted by trying to serve customers? You can actually make changes that are not going to cost you because it's all internal, but use the advantage of the quiet period to operate differently or to change your strategy. And that was fairly successful. We did that through the Swedish American Chamber in Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Boston, and went out to the members and then out to the general community. But it's again making that list of things, but taking it. I think of when you have a disruptive event like COVID, it's time to set back and reconsider and replan. Take advantage of the disadvantage. It's an opportunity. Think of things like that. Like I'm trying to advocate now that we're looking at what looks like a downside of the economy, use that downside to reconstruct yourself and be ready for the upside.
Yeah, I want to reiterate something you just said. Take advantage of the disadvantage.
Yes.
That's fabulous. That's a great little quote there, Stephen.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a personal perspective, I remember doing some videos when COVID first hit.
Yep.
If you're not working, clean your back basement, go for walks, do things that you haven't had the chance to do for years.
Exactly.
Everybody has their back burner project. But for business, reevaluating.
Yes.
Yeah, using it productively.
Use it productively, and rather than focusing on reducing your staff and doing all the things that you think you need to do to survive, I think it's just a great opportunity.
Yeah, excellent. Opportunity takes time in some cases. What about the time management concept, Stephen? Like, how do people manage all of their juggling priorities, family, work? What about some thoughts about that?
Well, again, what I do is that I keep a daily list and a weekly list of things that I'm focused on, and it includes all the things you're talking about: family, what my own interests are, and I try to keep them in priority in terms of what is most important that time. That importance could change. And so one of the things I do is keep Fridays totally open, so that if I've got time, I can move the things that I get the most satisfaction out of to the top of the list. So it's creating your own map. That's, I think of it in those terms.
Yeah, a lot of the times when you ask somebody why they're starting their business, I want to have my 4-day work weeks. And I'm thinking to myself, well, good luck. I hope that happens to you one of these days.
Yes. Don't, no. And if that's what your goal is, I suspect that it's not going to work.
Yeah. Oh,
I mean, you and I probably both know that it's not unusual to find yourself doing something on a Saturday or a Sunday that you didn't do during the week, but it's on your mind, and the only way to erase it or get it off the list is to do it then.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you're a workaholic by nature, then having a business might not be a bad idea. But
yes.
Yeah. Stephen, you've had quite a storied success in your career. Would you care to share some of the more success stories that you're proud of? It may or may not have to do with your current position.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things that I think that I've benefited from internally, and I'll give you two examples. I'll try to be brief. One of the last Fortune 500 company I worked for, which everybody was surprised that I took the job, was at a coal mining company that was headquartered in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And they had properties around Colorado, West Virginia, and at one point, the assignment was multiple, but at one point we had a mining accident, and 5 men were killed. And so I had flown down to West Virginia to be present for the media, because in West Virginia you have all the major media, of course, are just all over the mining industry. And we would hold briefings about every 3 hours. And finally, we had gotten the bodies out of the mine, and one of the media, NBC guys, said, well, Steve, he said, who's responsible for this? And I said, management's responsible. We shouldn't have people working in a mine where there is methane that's going to explode. All the lights went out, everybody ran for the phones, and that story was all over. By the time I got back to the office, the lawyer for the firm stood in my office door and started yelling and screaming at me, you stupid, you're going to cost us millions of dollars. And the guy who was the CEO and the chairman of the company tapped him on the shoulder and said, Bill, Steve did the right thing. If you can't manage it, I will find somebody who can.
Oh.
Now, that resonated all the way back, not that particular scene, but the whole taking the responsibility resonated throughout the industry, and even to the governor of West Virginia, and he just said, this is what the industry should be doing, is taking responsibility, and et cetera. So that was a big turning point to me, to be, I took the risk, but it was worthwhile.
Wow. That I mean, being able to speak your mind to the world's media at that time was quite something.
Risky. Yeah, it was risky to me. So even when this was at night again, so everyone went home, and I decided to go home, and I went back down to the local town, and where I was staying in this motel, or I was planning to go, and the guy at the motel said, Mr. Anderson, he said, the word on the street is you're going to lose your job when you get back to Philadelphia. And I said, really? I said, I didn't know. But so it was already just, filtering out.
Wow. I mean, I think very few people can say that they've had a hand in turning an industry
Yes.
to have more responsibility, especially a large one such as oil and gas.
Well, sorry, you don't have to include this, but I'll just add something. One of the outcomes of that was that the United Mine Workers ended up agreeing to a separate contract with Westmoreland that was based on the idea of the Six Sigma application, where you have people are collaborating, or its management and the workforce are collaborating on an equal level in the operations of the business. And that was, so we had implemented that at my suggestion within Westmoreland and with everyone. They saw the advantage of it, then they accepted it. I mean, the union, having a union agree to something like that, and having management give up the authority within a mining operation from that was really earth-shaking. But it changed the relationship with the mine workers and with the whole thing. So it had a ripple effect that was worthwhile.
Excellent. Wow, what a success that is.
Yeah, well, it's just one, it just demonstrates again sort of what benefit of collaboration.
When you do the right thing in business, the dust will settle and people will realize that, yeah, it was the right thing to do, to be honest.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
On the other side, Stephen, would you care to share some lessons learned? Some people call it failures.
Yes, failures. Let me see. I can think of a failure too. We try to think of one that would be mindful. We had one company that was, it was an Asian company, and they were entering the US, and they had hired us to work for them. And they had had a practice of hiring engineers right out of graduate school or undergraduate school to be salespeople. And that is what they had been doing in Asia. I said, that is not going to work here in the US.
So graduated engineers becoming salespeople, okay?
Turn them into salespeople with no sales experience. All they knew is about the engineering part. And so they disagreed with me. And I said, anyway, I tried to convince them. And my conviction failed. But they also ended up failing on the sales side and had to change but that took them 4 years to do that. Now, that was expensive 4 years for them. It was like something like, well, several $1 million a year.
Yeah. So
that is a failure on my part, not bringing it to their attention effectively. And so I consider that a serious failure.
Right. I mean, people have to realize, whatever market you're in, the cultural differences.
The cultural differences are absolutely true. And yeah, they're not transferable. So that's something that we work on quite a bit. And even though everyone thinks they understand the United States, they don't realize how complex it is,
Right. I mean, something might be applicable on the West Coast, but East Coast,
Well, even, difference between Rhode Island and Pennsylvania would be significant. I mean, or Oklahoma, or, I mean, one of my favorite funny stories I had a friend of mine in New York who was a banker from Switzerland. And after he got through his 3 years working, he and his girlfriend were traveling across the United States by car. And he thought, oh, piece of cake. He called me up one day. He said, Steve, I've been driving for 3 days and I'm still in Texas. I mean, how do I get out of here? So I said, well, this is not Switzerland.
Stephen, let's talk about, put your future hat on.
Yeah.
Where do you think the future lies for you in a few years time from now?
Well, I don't know, but I don't really have a clear picture of what it's going to be like, but I have an idea that I'm trying to test, and that is to continue with my concept, but not necessarily having it to be tied to a consulting group, because I'm getting older, and I don't think I should be having the people seeing me to be responsible for them. I guess that's what I'm thinking. And
Right.
that's not a clear point to me, but I think that my principles will continue. I just have to maybe reconstruct them, be flexible again, to do the things. So I'm starting to look more seriously at what of those 4 concentrations, how can I, within any one of them, what I can do the most good. And I think the entrepreneurship is going to be the target, because it rides through everything else.
Yeah, it encompasses aspects of all of the other 3. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the way the roadmap looks today.
Interesting to have that inward facing discussion internally. It's not easy for many.
No, it's not. It's not easy. And because I've seen guys who have retired, and women, and their life is not the same, and they don't feel there's a focus, and they are at a loss. And so I don't want to have that way of life.
Yeah, I mean, we hear about people defining themselves by the work they've done for the last how many years, and all of a sudden the work is done, they retired, now what? They have no purpose.
Now what? Exactly. Yeah. In fact, they're so dependent on that for their own sense of good, that it is sad, because they know that it's just it's no longer there. So something to avoid.
For sure. Well, Stephen, we're coming to the end of our time today.
Okay.
I know we could talk at length about little tidbits of wisdom. You've shared some great ones today. Would you happen to have some just overarching words of wisdom for small business?
Yeah, this is not going to be new or anything, except I would just ask them to pay as much attention to their customer, and knowing who and what the customer's issues are, and even looking outside of what these customers' world is, so that you have a better understanding and can actually be more helpful to them, that is beyond the service or the product you're providing.
Yeah, it's something I've been saying for a long time. Once you become known as a resource,
yes, exactly,
in whatever specialty or industry, people will find you, and people want to work with the best.
Yes, and somebody that they can trust. Yeah.
The trust, the genuinity.
Yes, because I mean, a lot of people consider themselves the best, but I would always be cautious when I think somebody thinks that they're the best.
Yeah, that's very true. Stephen, how can somebody get in touch with you, please?
They can email me or they can call me. Calling, though, is a little bit dangerous, because if I don't recognize it, I usually don't accept the call. But the email, I have no choice. So my email address is Sanderson, that's S as in Sam, ANDERSON, at M as in Mary, AG, S as in Sam, F as in Frank, .US as the United States.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you.
So we were joined today by Stephen Anderson from the Marquis Advisory Group. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing some entrepreneur wisdom on Talk to the Fedora. We hope that this segment has helped you to grow your small business. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to check out some of the many hundreds of other entrepreneur videos from the eSAX archives. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephen.
You bet. Good seeing you.